You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. Our guest today is Wayne Mallows, who is not only the author of the Vampyre Tales, but also a heritage home restorer and a very good friend of mine. Wayne was my first Fika guest ever, and though we had socialized often in the same circle, I never really got to know him until I read Dark Origins. And knowing him and reading his books has been a pleasure. As he's been taking a break from writing to restore his own haunted Gothic revival manor house. That's a mouthful, Wayne. That's a mouthful of description there. And that, fingers crossed, will soon be done. I wanted to catch him for a conversation before he returned back to his world of vampires to pen another book. So I asked him to Fika, and he said yes again. Welcome to Fika, Wayne.
Thanks, Vicky. Nice to be here again.
So, how are you?
Truth or lies? I'm really worn out. I'm tired, but I'm okay. I'm good.
It'll be happiness when all is done, and a lot to be proud of, I'm sure. So, where did all this vampire stuff start from? Like, I mean, where did the idea come from?
It's a little complicated. It's a long story. It's goes back to my childhood when as a kid growing up, everybody's sort of like, oh, I want to be a firefighter. I want to be superhero, whatever. And all the cool kids had all the superheroes, so they all had like the Superman. I'm Batman. I have a towel tucked in my T-shirt. Look at me go. And I didn't like any of the cool kids. I was kind of the pariah of the group. So I didn't want to associate with any of the cool kids. So I didn't have a superhero. I didn't have anybody to identify with. And then I started to like read about vampires and things like that. And I thought, well, they're really different. They're kind of scary, but they also have a vulnerable side. They're somewhat revered in some ways. And even as a kid, I started to sort of delve into a little bit about what they were. By no means I wasn't a scholar by any means. I didn't like libraries. I'd rather play hockey or something. But that's where it all began. I just sort of started to identify similarities to especially the vulnerable side, the lonely side. They can't associate with people. They can only do certain things. And I really identified with that. So that's where I think it started from.
Which is sort of how you portray your vampires in your novels, is that like your vampires have souls. They remember their past lives. Mm-hmm. And their past lives sort of reflect what kind of vampires they become. They don't change that much.
When I started to create, it wasn't even supposed to be a series. It was just supposed to be a single book. It was just an expression of ideas. And I wanted to sort of veer away from the sort of stereotypical vampire everything, so I started to really research into it, and I wanted to break away from the little pretty, excuse me, the little pretty holes in the neck, and the lots of money and the castles and all the stuff that kind of the lore that goes with it. And I tried to make it more realistic, try to pull from history. Where did it come from? Every culture right around the world has got some sort of connection to a vampire being. So then I started to pull from all of that. So I wanted to go that route rather than the stereotypical type of way to go.
And you do. Your vampires, your story takes place on the streets of London, on farms, in battlefields in World War II. There isn't that, nicey 19th century manor house.
What are you saying?
I couldn't resist, Wayne. It was there. So they come from different places. Mm-hmm. They're not the proper people that we often see in the vampire stories.
Right. I think for me, a part of the challenge for me was I didn't want it all spelled out, not just for the reader, but for the characters as well. You've read them, so you know a lot of times they get the immortal question, what are we, what are you, sort of thing, and they don't know. And that was key for me, because you wake up one day and you're this thing, right? And you don't know where it came from, you don't know what it is, you don't know how to cope with it. And that's how I wanted to start the book, this complete way of, I don't know what I am, I don't know what's happened to me, nobody knows what's wrong with me, my family doesn't know, the doctors don't know, the shrinks of the time don't know. So it's just this complete lack of knowledge, this complete feeling of being lost in an abyss and not knowing what's happening. So that's where I wanted to sort of start it from. In the first book, I use the word vampire one time, and it's sort of loosely used by a priest who basically says what you're loosely describing as a vampire, but it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the vampire himself could have argued that.
Yes, but it's very difficult unless you want to expose yourself. So
yeah, no. Well, I compare, because your original vampire was younger,
mm-hmm.
and on the brink of starting life.
Mm-hmm.
I compare it to a coming of age story where you do feel like at certain ages, or all of them, depending on who you are, but you do feel lost and confused. And who is this person I am becoming? Like, who is this monster I am becoming? So I think, well, like I said, they're vampire books, but they don't have to be. The story would still be there without the vampire. Like, they are basically, to me, historical novels, because you do a lot of research.
Oh yeah.
And character driven, because the little voices in your head tells you what they want you to do with them, right? We've discussed that before. It's out
we
there.
don't talk about the voices inside Wayne's head.
No, I want to talk about the voices in Wayne's head, because they're very creative.
Well, they are creative.
You said you have no secrets. I said
no, there's no secrets. No.
So you start writing your novel, and then these characters begin to take on a life of their own, and explain to you what they wanted to happen.
Yeah, it was different for me, because I wrote technical manuals, I wrote shop manuals, I wrote teaching agendas for school and things like that. It was always very, methodical, very plotted. This was different. Like I said, I started out to write one story, and I had an idea. So this is how it's going to go. And the first chapter, it went so smooth. I was really pleased, not to toot my own horn, but it went smooth. It really went. Nothing in my life goes smooth, so I was a little worried. But then I got to chapter 2, and then it wasn't writer's block, because I've never really suffered from writer's block. It was more of this clash of what I thought, and it wouldn't go. It simply wouldn't go. I'd write a couple of lines, and be like, oh, I don't like it, erase it. Okay, do it this way. Didn't go. And it was for the introduction of the female wrongdoer. And I remember leaning back in my office chair, kind of going like, what's wrong with this? Like, why won't it flow? And that was the first time, honestly, that I heard a voice that wasn't my own in my head. And it was this little British voice. And she said, because I'm not like that. Stop making me so simple. And I was like, okay, erased everything, ripped up my notes that were at the side of the computer, and because I used to do everything longhand. And so I thought, okay, I'll change everything about you. So I changed her hair color, her eye color, her height, her stature, her mental stability, everything about her I changed. And bam, there she was. And she was perfect, like just perfect. She almost took over the book because she was too perfect.
She was the book to me. I liked her.
So did Michelle. Michelle liked her a lot.
And what does that say about us? But I'm going to defend her now, because you called her a wrongdoer. Mm-hmm. And once again, as I said, these vampires don't forget their former life. And she had known a lot of trauma in her life before this. She had known everything. So she carried that hurt with her into your head.
Hmm. Absolutely.
in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in her life, and like you say, there's a lot of trauma in her life that created who she is. And when my main character says to her, like, what are we and what are you, and she goes, well, don't be silly, I'm a woman. Like, just like you're a man, like why do you ask such stupid questions? I thought you were brighter than that. But like she's always like very almost flippant about it because she's been that way he's been that way for argument's sake 50 years, and she's been that way for 200 years. Like, my vampires aren't ancient, not in the first books. So neither one of them really have a clue what's going on. They're just who they are.
No, no, and because they didn't have anybody really to foster them, to
No,
parent them, to tell them who they were, they
no,
just woke up and had this ferocious hunger.
that's right. And that's the way it goes along, right? So she's just trying to, she doesn't even really take the time to explain it to him because she doesn't really know either. So she's just there. And I say wrongdoer because,
I know you can call her that.
oh, well,
Just
she's the bad girl in the group, as it were, and but at one
the
point,
mean
like,
girl.
I try to justify what she does through her explanations as the books go along. And she says at one point to Aramis, who's the main character, she goes, look at these people around us. She goes, they struggle, they try to get ahead, they do everything. She goes, and yet I can walk through any forest or any street or any laneway completely without fear.
Hmm.
I fear nothing, I fear no one.
Well,
She goes, can
and
you
that,
can you say the same?
and oh, Michelle says naughty Mary. I think that's a good word,
No,
Michelle.
naughty Mary. Oh, yeah,
I'm not.
yeah.
She's not bad. She's just naughty.
Well,
And
before the fourth book came out, where we introduced the ancient ones, Mary/Jacqueline was Michelle's favorite character all the way through the book.
well, I started off with number 4 because that was a whole trauma in itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Um. What's the laughs? Michelle is laughing now. We're making her happy. This is good.
Happy's good.
Continue to make Michelle happy. Um, I had a trauma just reading your series, okay? And you were responsible for that, Wayne.
What was the trauma?
Okay, so I was invited Wayne to Fika. I hadn't invited him yet, but because Wayne took his first book, Whitechapel Road, which is this thick for those watching. For you listening, your average 362 word book. And because he didn't like the amount of details he had put in there, he went back after another 2 books in the series, and wrote a 652 page first book with more details in it. So I got into the Wayne reading at a Comic-Con. So I started with his 4th book, which could be called a prequel. And that takes place in medieval times. And so I wanted to go back and read the other books. But Wayne said, no, you have to read them in sequence, but I won't give you the first one because I'm rewriting it. And I was like, no. I have to read these books. Like, I have to know how this whole thing, how I have to read more of these books because I was so enamored with Dark Origins, the 4th, the prequel. So one day we were at a mutual social engagement and we had just ordered dinner. And I kept saying, Wayne, I want the book. Wayne, I want the book. Wayne, I want the book. Because when I want a book, I'm Michelle is woohoo, book 4. Yes, we all love book 4. At least the females.
Well, the males like it too. I have a lot of male
like
readers that like it as well.
That's right. I'm not. So I kept saying I want this book because I did. And Wayne got up before his dinner even got there and went home and brought me the books, which made me feel very bad, but I still accepted the books anyways because
You
that's
should
the
feel
kind
special,
of guy.
not bad.
Well, I was feeling special until I realized none of, as I'm still complaining, none of those books are autographed.
What? Really?
Yeah, those 3 books aren't autographed. So, my Dark Origins,
Oh, I'm surprised.
my Dark Origins is autographed, but Mary Quite Contrary and the original Whitechapel Road, and
I'll have to swing by with my pen.
so yes, I was going to say we'll go out to dinner again, and you can order your food and then
Run home and get a pen.
run home and get a pen. It's a little bit further now. So that was my trauma in reading.
What, that they weren't
getting
signed?
to read your series? No, the having to wait until you. I mean, if I had waited until you had finished your second writing of Whitechapel Road, I would have been forever to read them.
Oh.
So that was my original trauma. Now my trauma is that they're not autographed, but we'll rectify.
The second trauma we can fix.
We'll rectify that. So, were you happy with the second Whitechapel Road once you finished it? Did that make
absolutely.
you happy?
You have to remember that Whitechapel Road started off as a single story, single book. That was it. But by the time I was 2/3 of the way through it, I'd already written the ending for book 2. So I realized, okay, it's going to have to be a series. But I didn't know how far it was going to go. I had no intention of writing a series. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the patience. There was too much going on. But the characters kept, like poke, 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 poke. And so I would write notes down, and I would hear dialogue in the car when I'm driving, and I'd make notes after note after note after note. It was just bizarre. So it started to create itself. So, but yeah, long story short, the second Whitechapel Road is exactly the way I wanted it, because now I know it's a series, so I could tie in so many loose ends that weren't there. Now it sort of, it doesn't give anything away, but as you go along, there'll be things that happen and things that occur. And then when you get into book 2 and then book 3, there's little, oh, I remember that. Oh, I remember that from book 1. I remember that from book 2. But they don't, it doesn't ruin the read if it's not there. It just makes it more complete and more satisfying to the reader.
It makes you happy.
Makes me happy, for sure. I like a story. I'm not good when there's 15 different stories going on within a story, because I just can't function. I'm very I got to do one thing, maybe 2 at a time. But I like when, there's a series of events that occur and they're significant enough for you to remember them. And then 100 years down the road, when you're reading about something else comes up and you go, oh my God, that's what that was. I get it now. It didn't make sense at the time. And now I understand why he or she said that or did this.
So you're a thorough writer.
I'd like to think so.
You want to? Okay, I'm going to say you are a thorough writer.
And I'd say I'd like to think so.
And so you would rather have one straight story with all the pieces put together there than to have a lot of different trails.
Yeah.
And because really, ultimately, you don't have that many characters.
No, I don't. I have like my 2 or 3 main characters that flow along and go through it. And then I bring in secondary characters and so forth just to bolster the story, per se.
Yeah, because you have to have some other people
right
there. So Allison says
he's a through writer.
He is. She meant thorough writer, and I'm pretty sure. I didn't even notice that because I wasn't being difficult. Allison, she's being difficult. Okay.
Thank you, Allison.
There's nothing we can do about that. And hi, and thanks for joining. So when we talk about thorough and also a perfectionist, you are also very thorough in your research.
Yeah, that can be undermine me sometimes. It can be a bit tricky. I think for me, writing the books, again, I go back to, for argument's sake, you're dealing with a fictional character, and I'm not going to get into it because I believe they exist, and that's a whole nother story. But when you have a fictional character, the danger in writing a fictional story about a fictional character, you can have to do anything at all. And then what happens is it becomes unbelievable after a while. So I needed to hold true to the line that I want them believable. This man or woman could be your next door neighbor. They come over, they shovel your snow. What a great guy. Meanwhile, they go out at night and kill people. So I wanted it to be very realistic that way. So the research had to be bang on. So in Whitechapel Road, like I'll have situations where there's a dock fire just across the river from Whitechapel. And that actually occurred. Like I got the weather, I've got it gets to be so stupid where I'm laying topographical maps from 1888, the time of Jack the Ripper, over top of modern day Whitechapel to see what roads are still there. How many meters are there in a block? And in Britain, they don't use blocks, they use streets. They don't say he's 4 blocks over, it's 4 streets over. So it's a whole lingo thing I had to learn as well. But then I would go and say, okay, my guy is approximately my height, and he is 4 streets over from where this murder occurs. If he's running, how long realistically would it take him to get to that spot? I mean, that's ridiculous. But I mean, when I say it only takes 3 minutes to get there, I don't want someone going, well, it would take like much longer. No, I actually ran it, so I know. So it's how long it takes to do it. And then I would compare that to the constable who would walk a beat. And I'd have all the beats written down. So I would know, PC 1, 2, 3, he does a figure 8 between Mitre Square and, the other roads, right? So I knew it took him, let's say, 15 minutes to do the beat walk. And that's documented, so we know. So I know that my killer only has, at best, 14 minutes to pull off this crime because it's documented. And that's how it became so specific for me to do what I was doing. And that's the research I put in.
I want to discuss more about that, but we just have a couple of comments till then.
Okay.
Michelle said, and I have to show this because it's funny. Michelle, when you said you did add other people, Michelle wrote other people, food.
Food. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no.
Oh, you are difficult today. That was funny. Just laugh.
I'm not saying it wasn't funny. It's fact.
And Brian, hi Brian. In terms of your writing process, what sort of writing tools do you use to keep track of research notes, timelines, as well as the actual writing?
Good question. A lot of it's in my head, if you can believe it. It just kind of rattles around in there. Once I'm focused on the story, I'll go over it and over and over it. What I tell people is I write from a memory. What I mean by that is I'll start working on a specific part of the story. Let's say the chance meeting in a laneway of Mary and Aramis. And I'll look at the laneway in real time, if it's still there. If not, I'll look at photographs and I'll get a sense of what's going on in the laneway. Then I'll bring in the weather and I'll walk the laneway in my mind probably 100 times. What do the bricks look like? What does the ground look like? What is the weather? Where does the rain come from? Does it come straight down? Does it come from the side? Can it come from the side? Where's the wind coming from? All that. So when I start to write it, it's as if I was there. Like I'd walked that laneway 100 times. I know what it feels like, and I can write it from a memory. From the note aspect, it depends. Sometimes I'll get a glimpse of something really brief, a word, a view, and I'll write it down on anything I have. I have pens in the truck. I have papers in the truck. So if I'm driving, I can just slap it on my knee and write down the name of it, right? Like in one section, I can't remember what book it was. I think it was the third book. A character says to this elder gentleman, like, "What are you?" And the response is, well, we've been asked that question a million times, but your kind would used to refer to us as Nakru. And it's more like Nakru, like that. And that came to me right before I was going to sleep. And I don't know where it came from, but I could almost hear it in my head. It was like that roll, that Nakru, so I wrote it down phonetically. I tried to look it up, but there was nothing, but I kept that forever. And the way the character explained it to me, it was, we are the king of the nocturnal, Nakru. So that's what I translated it to be. It's a fictitious word.
So the fact that you remembered that I just read that as I was rebrushing up on the books. Out of
Yeah.
all of the books, makes it believable that you keep it all in your head.
Oh yeah.
Wait, that
Yeah.
you just kept that in your head.
But the dialogue is important too, because like I'll have dialogue between two, maybe three characters. And when I was working full time, I'd work nights. So I had a lot of driving to do. So that rambled around in my head. And to me, the dialogue has to be so spot on, because you would say something and then I'd be like, would my character actually say that? Would it be proper English? I mean, at one point, Aramis speaks very properly because of the time period. He'll say something like, I do not feel like dinner tonight. He doesn't say I don't or I won't. Right. So, but as we get into book 3, at one point, he's talking to a female character and they have sort of a thing going on. And he said something like, well, I don't really want to do that. And she smiled and she said, what did you say? He said, I don't feel like doing that. And she's like, you said don't. Usually I'm so used to saying do not, and she's like, what happened? He goes, well, I guess you're rubbing off on me. And it's just that sort of that gentle transition over many years that I want the reader to feel.
And comment is made on that throughout the books. Actually, people have comment on the fact that he must think that he's something to speak so properly, or
Exactly.
that's the way my mother wanted it to be.
Correct.
So yeah, vampires have to sort of keep track of where they are and at what time period, and sort of move with the groove in order
It's
to
never
stay.
fun for them. For my guy, it's just like I got away from that whole I live forever and I live in a castle and it's fantastic. He's always on the move, right? He can't keep a job for too long. He can't stay in one place for too long. He can't rent a place for too long. And as time goes along, like, he realizes like, I really can't do that because people are dying and they're going to put the finger on me. So he's always on the move. It's hard to make friends. It's hard to have relationships.
Okay. Dave is in the house. David Benison. So he says he loves that you used real history for a fictional story.
Mm-hmm.
And then this one, which I agree with. Wayne needs to write a story about a guy who fixes houses and finds all kinds of horrors in plumbing and shoddy construction. Lots of laughs. So,
well, I was joking with Vicky when we first started doing this. I said I was going to talk about the pitfalls of old plumbing and drywall screws versus nails. That's all I've done in the last 5 years.
But hey, you've come a long way. And although I don't think you should just write a book about a shoddy plumbing, I think that you could write a series, and I've said this before, about someone who restores houses, and he restores spirits that in these haunted Victorian homes or whatever to where they should be. Mm-hmm. So you have the knowledge of both things. Why not go for it, Wayne? I would love to read that.
Well, a buddy of mine says I should do something like Homes on Homes, but I'd do it with vampires, like gothic renovation or something like that. The guys only come to work on your place at night.
Yes, Allison says that if you started writing about that in reference to the shoddy plumbing, I'm sure you'd never finish.
No. It's horrible. It's horrifying, the stuff you find in the walls.
So Wayne is not afraid of vampires or ghosts. He is, however, afraid of 1970s construction.
Oh, the stuff I found in walls. I found a wall that was put together by pallets. Like there were skids just nailed together. They used so many spiral nails to put this thing together. It probably cost them more in nails than if they went and bought 2x4s. Then in the other wall was put together by election signs. Just the little 2x2s. They still had the points on them when they drove them in the grass. Like I just shake my head. I'm like, what's holding this house up?
Yes, and we'll move on because I probably shouldn't have brought that topic up.
Why am I starting to shake?
No. So we'll take one more comment before we go on about research. Brian said, perhaps old houses can be considered to be a form of vampire that sucks the time
Brian,
and life
right
out of this.
I've said it a few times. The house is trying to kill me.
back to my series about the handyman restoring haunted homes.
No.
Okay. Okay, we still have time. I can wear you down on this.
Go ahead.
So research. Now, before, you know what? Let's just hold on research for a second, because we were talking about, the vampires not knowing who they are and being uncomfortable with that. But part of, I think we've discussed earlier, the reason the vampires get away with doing that is because the humans in the story are uncomfortable with the idea of vampires, and so they won't look into that as a solution. And you brought up that a certain inquiry document that you had read about the blood leaving. Did you want to
You have to be more specific than that. There's a lot of stuff.
Okay. About the woman only being half full. The blood is only.
Oh, that's right.
full.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. In the prologue of the first book, it even says it, like, sometimes the answer stands square in the spotlight, but we're so uncomfortable and it's so out of the box that it's not even brought in for consideration. And that's what happens a lot of times. So when I was researching, I went through the murders of Jack the Ripper, the weather for the time periods, so many things that were brought into consideration. But I also went all over the coroner's reports and the police reports, which were like dozens. Many of them were conflicting. I had a lot of problems. I had to reach out to numerous people to try to get clarification, because in the first murder, the coroner would say whatever he said. But then in the second murder, he refers back to the first murder, but he contradicts himself. So which one's right? So it was daunting. It was just a daunting task to figure out who was right. But to back up a little bit, when I was looking for a story to substantiate my story, I looked at a lot of things that people would understand. Like, you could say World War II, somebody knows a little bit about it. You can say Jack the Ripper and people be like, oh, that's the madman that killed people somewhere in Europe. They have some idea of what it is. And that's what I was looking for, just some idea. But what solidified it for me was when I started to research. One of the things that I think the coroner's name was Phillips, but I can't guarantee, because they changed a few of them through the time period. When he came out to look at the second murder of first murder of Polly Nichols. She was murdered up on a place, I think it was called Bucks Row, and a constable found her. And back then, like, forensics was in its infancy, so they would do all kinds of things they would never do now. So science was up and coming, photography was up and coming, and the coroner was pretty much embracing this new idea, whereas before it was all eyewitnesses. So this was new and very controversial. So when he got there, he looked at the body, and she had a big slash, a double slash across her throat. They didn't know what else was done underneath because she was still dressed. But so he said to the leading inspector, he said, did they move the body? And he said, no, that's where she was found. He went back to the body and looked, and he came back to the inspector. He said, then, sir, I put it to you this way. Where did the blood go? Because I only found about enough blood to fill a wine glass to half full. So to me, that was solidification for me. It's a good place to start a vampire story, because where did the blood go? Indeed. Well, I know where it went. So, but it doesn't actually, they never did really figure it out where it went, because they swear up and down they never moved the body, but they only found a little bit of blood running down the street. There wasn't enough for that kind of damage. Well, that's where that came from.
So they didn't listen to Sherlock Holmes, who said, if you can't find a probable answer, then the answer is...
No matter how unlikely it has to be. Exactly right.
They didn't go for the vampires. And that is that is what a writer does. Mm-hmm. I mean, you take that and say, but what if?
But then we fast forward.
Like you said,
If you fast forward into the next book, I have, which Mary takes place in modern day. So you have, again, a series of murders taking place, and now we have DNA and we have proper investigation protocols and things like that. Doesn't matter if you're homeless or you're well-to-do, it's going to get investigated. And you have two inspectors on the case, and it's funny because they stop their car on a street where, other horrible things had happened in the past. And he said, why are we stopping? And he said, I just can't help but think that our predecessors 140 years ago were on the same trail, but they decided to go the route of proven police forensics and missed out on what was going on. He goes, I'm not going to have that happen. He goes, what are you suggesting? He says, I'm suggesting you might want to get out of the car because I'm going the route of non-police protocol and it might cost me my job. So, and the guy's like, well, I'm in, so let's do it. And then they veer away from normal protocols and start going down the rabbit hole of what if.
And that's the beginning of every great story.
Yeah, what if?
What if? So while we have time, before we get too far along, I'm going to hold up each book. And for those who cannot see, these books have photographs of them. This one of 19th century Jack Ripper, England.
Yeah, Jack the Ripper stomping grounds. That was a pub that all the ladies of the night frequented, because the pub is basically short form for public house. So they were open 24 hours. People could go in and get a soup or a drink, whatever they wanted. Generally speaking, if you were a streetwalker, you wouldn't get water. Water was polluted, so you'd get gin. At least that was purified. And you'd get, either, if you could afford it, you'd get a whole baked potato, but most people got a half a baked potato. So you got a glass of gin and a half a baked potato, and that's what you ate for your day. If you can imagine that. Brutal. Just brutal situations.
And so a little bit of synopsis for that one. Like, tell us like a short summary to encourage readership, but not the whole story.
It's a damn good book. You should read it. Essentially what it is it's a story of two vampires that are kind of having it out, one guy just wants to live his life and figure it out, and the creator is there causing havoc. And the murders that were created by Jack the Ripper are the fallout. They're the casualties of this little folly that's going on. That's what it is. Yeah. So I give you an alternate reason as to why the murders happened and why they were never discovered, or the perpetrator was never discovered. How about that?
Okay. Then we go on to Mary, Mary, Quite Contrary, which has a photograph of a half glass of a wine glass with blood,
half full of blood,
which is part of the stuff. Wait, do you see your wine glass half full of blood, or it has half empty, or half full?
There's no wine glass. In my world, there's no wine glass. It doesn't exist. So in that one, again, we just touched on that briefly, but it unfolds in Whitechapel, but it's modern day. Evidence comes to light when we don't really know what it is. A young kid finds stuff that is connected or allegedly connected to Jack the Ripper that's never been seen before, and he starts a rudimentary investigation to try to figure out what it is, and attracts all kinds of bad attention from the press, from his friends, colleagues, schoolmates, people that do this sort of thing for a living, but also gets the notoriety of someone who really doesn't want this coming to light. So the murders start all over again, but this time they're just random. They're so random. There doesn't seem to be any pattern to them whatsoever. And then the police are, of course, brought in, and the cat and mouse game is afoot.
Before we go on to the third book, Tamara says hello, Victoria and Wayne. And
hi, Tamara.
Hi, Tamara. Thanks for watching.
I see you comment on all of Michelle's shows. It seems really weird sitting in the master's chair here.
I thought that room looked hauntingly familiar.
Oh, it's hauntingly familiar. I'm not even allowed in here. Don't kid yourself.
Poor Wayne. I will say that once this show. Poor Wayne. You hear poor Wayne. A natural selection, for those who cannot see, has a photograph of a bloody hand reaching up and grabbing another hand, which is has a nurse's uniform sleeve on it.
Yeah. That basically what that is it's Unnatural selection is exactly what it is. It voids natural selection. It goes against the norms of nature. And the book cover is just showing that, the dark hand reaching up. It's very profound. It's like the light reaching down to the darkness reaching up to the light, and the two holding on to each other. Like it's sort of a yin and yang kind of thing. But it's my romance novel, but it's not like, oh my God, you're a vampire. Wow. It's not like that. Again, it's very realistic. It's very tumultuous. It's very unsettling for both parties that are involved in this thing. And it does take you down a really horribly dark rabbit hole of human evolution, I guess it were, the human psyche.
Okay, Michelle, I only said poor Wayne, if that's what you're asking about. What? To humor him, not because I think he has it so bad. Okay.
Oh, I don't have it bad at all. I know I don't come in this room. I'm scared of this room. I don't like walking past the door because if something goes wrong, it's on me.
Yes, I find in any conversation that it's best just to say poor Wayne and have it done. Okay, and Tamara said yes, she does comment a lot on Michelle's show. Lots of laughs, and we'll bring this one up because it's longer. Dave would love to hear Wayne's thoughts on the real Jack the Ripper. Do you think he was ever close to being identified, or had he been truly identified? Well, Wayne, you think he's a vampire, right?
Well, I can't even say that because it'll give it all away. But, but to Dave's question, I'll tell you exactly what I dug up in research, and then you can draw your own conclusions on that. First of all, being from English descent, boy, we're a staunch bunch. It's just like the pride runs deep. So, to have a killer running amok amongst the Metro Constabulary as well as Scotland Yard and making a mockery of it, that didn't sit well. Didn't sit well with anybody. And when I was reading the commissioner's memoirs at the end of it all, he wrote his memoirs, sort of 10 years after the fact. So here's a guy that was in charge of everything during Jack the Ripper's murders. And the only thing he wrote was a paragraph, like the smallest little paragraph in this massive, memoir that he wrote. And it was very interesting to me because it said, by 1893, we already knew who Jack the Ripper was. But to bring it to light would only serve to discredit two police forces. No good would come from it. So they absolutely knew who it was, right? But there was no point in pointing it out. Now, that's either because the person was already dead, and there's no point in trying a corpse. You can't. That the person was already incarcerated for several other horrific things and was going to be hung anyway. So there's that aspect of it as well. There's different theories that, that the perpetrator left England altogether. I don't subscribe to that, but that's what it is. But I often like the idea that Jack the Ripper was actually a female. And the reason I say that was you have to go back in time to that time period. And you have to look at how Whitechapel was set up at that time. Everyone thinks it was a big slum, and to a large degree it was. But literally across the road, 60 feet, was the high end of society. It's hard to get your head around, but it was like high end doctors, lawyers, all kinds of people right there. So if you were a woman and you were married to a highfalutin doctor and he died, right, you got nothing. You got evicted. Sorry, you're on the street, right? So when you look at where Doctors Row was, and then that's where doctors lived, and then where what they called then Doctors Hospital was located, which was in Whitechapel, doctors would have to frequent right through the red light district of that area to get to and from work. So I started to put it together that so many people ended up with syphilis, and it was brutal. It was horribly disfiguring, killing disease, nasty. So if your husband, this fine doctor, was going back and forth through Whitechapel and picked up syphilis and brought it home to you, then he died, right? And you're going to be evicted and you're going to lose your mind and probably die as well. I started to put it together that maybe this person was just a real upset woman who had it down on prostitutes and was just killing them. And it was, you can see by the crimes how vicious they were. They start off just with slashing, but then it gets to evisceration and all kinds of really horrible things. And then you factor in the crimes that weren't actually brought to light before the traditional sort of 5 that we know about. There was 2 or 3 before that started this whole thing going. So it really made me wonder if it could be a woman.
Actually, that's a really good theory.
Well, when you think about it, when I was reading about it, the women that were working the trade back then, when this all started, they would not even go out on the street without a partner, sometimes 2.
Yeah,
And there was no, you didn't take your guy to a hotel. You just went behind a fence or a garbage bin. That's where you did the deed, right? So what would happen was, like she would go behind the fence with her guy and the other woman would stand lookout. And if something started to go wrong, start screaming, and that would be it. Who better to get close? A woman would not be afraid of another woman coming up to her saying, hey, can we work tonight? Or do you need a spotter tonight? Whereas if a guy came up to her, they'd be like, oh, here comes a guy with a hat. We got to watch this guy. So it started to lay the footprints that in real time, could it have been a woman? Yeah, I think it could have been a woman. And that nothing would slap the Brits in the face like a woman holding 2 police forces at bay for all the months that it went on. That would discredit a police force like you have no idea back then.
Because as I was going to say earlier, with our not so good Naughty Mary character, as Michelle would put it, the women did not have power at that time. There was really, nothing you could do about that. But she sort of broke that.
Well, she even says that in her notes, like when she's talking, when she's doing damage on someone's face, and she says, above all, stop referring to me as a man. Right.
Because she has. So Tamara says that would explain the mental degradation of the murder. Right. Because and it would get worse as she began losing her mind.
I have no evidence. I have absolutely no evidence to back any of that up. It's literally, as I'm writing and as I'm creating this thing and I'm delving deeper and deeper and deeper into the research, it sort of went like, wait a minute, we're missing a whole other gender here that could be responsible for this murder.
Well, this is very interesting. Dave just said, not having read the books, but I'm finding this very humorous, just playing with the names, Jackie the Ripper.
Right.
And so when we...
He hasn't read the books, exactly.
Not because they're your books, just because, he has other things going on. So that was really, really close.
Well, and in Mary Mary, the book Mary Mary, the lead investigator, the inspector, like he's almost possessed by this. I've got to find out who it is, and I think the person who did it is not normal in the sense that they live longer than a normal human being does. And he starts to put it together, and he makes that exact notation. He goes, wait a second. When I was a kid, there, like his name, what was his name? Was the inspector? I can't remember his name. Let's say it's John. He says, and when I was in grade 3 class, there was John, me, and this other John. So the teacher used to have us put our last initial. So I was John B and he was John R. And he goes, what if the person who wrote the Jack the Ripper letter actually wrote it? It was supposed to be JAC with a capital K. And they missed it. He goes, then we'd have our killer standing right in front of us right now. That was the aha moment for the inspector.
So, so Tamara said lots of laughs, Dave, and I would like to ask Tamara not to encourage Dave.
Never encourage Dave.
To make lots of laughs. So, okay. So that is, and I personally love the fact that you even said it in Jack the Ripper London, because that you get a darker, more creepier time. She's all, Tamara's too accommodating. Okay, she says, okay, I'll stop encouraging Dave. we go to book 4, the prequel,
Yeah.
Dark Origins, which has a Knights Templar on the front cover for those
Right.
who cannot see. And this is just an amazing book. Not that they're all not amazing, but you can really see the progression.
Right. And Dark Origins is, like you said, it's a prequel. It goes back to the Middle Ages. I didn't put a date on it because I wanted to sort of be ambiguous with that, because it kind of spreads around through the Knights Templar era. But that's where I wanted sort of to draw from, where how old these guys are, and bring in sort of where it all starts from. And I use these two guys, these two sort of quote Knight Templar guys, to tell a story. And it would be just like, you and I having a conversation about the politics in Canada right now. And we would just be like, oh my God, did you get a hold of so-and-so? What is he doing? And why is this tax being what it is? This is what these two guys are doing while they're going about their business of mayhem. They're just talking about, like, what is the church doing and why are they doing it? And, they've basically erased history. So that's where I come at it. Like, these guys have been around since time began. They are the living history. So the whole idea of, the witch trials and the church coming in and all that stuff, it wasn't to bring about a religious sort of group. It was to eradicate the living history so they could write their own. So the only people that can stand in the way of that are these small group of elder vampires, and
so
they don't stand for it.
No. So they weren't really creating mayhem. They were, well, maybe to the government, as it were, but to the average person, they were heroes.
Well, they ate the average person, so they weren't really heroes.
Okay, let's get over. Okay, we've got some time left here, so let's get into this, Wayne.
Right.
They have no choice but to eat somebody. I mean, that is the way it is for them.
Right, but one person does it to survive, and one person thoroughly enjoys it.
Well, yeah, but that would be the same with humans, right? I mean,
correct.
You said that their past lives come into the type of vampires they are. So you take the protagonist who uses it to cull society, as you would like a pack of animals or whatever, to get to take away the ones that are suffering, that are sick, or just the ones that nobody likes. And then you have other ones that are finding joy in it. But I don't find that those two characters were finding joy in it, if I remember right.
Well, one thoroughly enjoyed it. He's like, I have no love for humanity.
But when you see him at the beginning, it's like he's fighting this war. So yeah.
But he's fighting this war against because the church's army is out to eradicate him. And his brethren. So he's going to take every opportunity to eradicate your entire armed forces if he can get a hold of them.
So why should he be miserable about doing that?
Oh, he's definitely not miserable. He thoroughly enjoys it.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
I mean, so many times there's a fight about to ensue. And, the one fella's like, well, maybe we can negotiate our way through this, and there doesn't have to be bloodshed. And the other guy just looks at him, he goes, you really have lost your mind. You really have. If you think that there's going to be no bloodshed tonight, I don't know who you've become.
Or who I've been hanging out with.
Yeah, exactly.
Michelle's saying what again? I think that's what WOT is. So we've done something like, I don't want you talking badly about that character, Wayne.
Well, no, that's well. To quote Michelle on many things, this guy is like, he's just irreverent. He doesn't care. If you get in his way, he'll kill you. And that's just that simple. I'm explaining this to Michelle, and I tell her this one part of the story, and she just looks at me across the table and goes, "Me loves him." Okay.
And so do we all, Michelle. So we all. So yes, it is a wonderful prequel, and it is also very well researched. And so that's why I say they're well researched historical novels and character driven. The characters are very strong and very. You don't have to agree with this. I'm telling the people listening, Wayne.
I'm just nodding. I'm listening. I nod when I listen.
So I'm just
Yes, they are.
no. I'd be more. Was expecting more the other hand, like like if you say so. So they are well.
If you say so.
They are well. I'm trying to be so good here. They are well researched historical novels, very character driven, and you can't get them yet until Wayne gets back to the book business because it is a direct to Wayne process. So, okay, he's exceptional. And I'm not sure if she's talking about our character in Dark Origins or you.
No, it's not
I
me.
believe
It'll be the
she
character.
is talking about you, Wayne. You are exceptional in your research, etc.
But I enjoy it. I think what I try to tell people is like I enjoy what I do. So it's not like I have to write, I have to create this, I have to do this, I have to do that. I actually love it. I love getting into it. I love digging up stuff. I love finding things. It's just part of who I am. So that goes into the book. All the characters that come to mind, I want them to be real. I want them to feel. I want them to hurt. I want them to laugh. I want them to love. I want them to feel loss. All of that stuff. So that somewhere along the line, someone will be reading that book and they'll laugh because it's, oh my God, that's such dark humor, but I get it. Or they'll read a part where there's a loss and they might actually cry because I've lived that. I know what that feels like to have that kind of loss, that loneliness. And I've lived it all. People, it's like when I look back on my own life, and it's not a sob story, but it's like I suddenly realized why things are so miserable all the way along is because it gave me such a fantastic perspective from which to write from, because I could understand it. I could feel the pain. I understood the loneliness. I understood what it was like to be the pariah of the group, to be ostracized from the group, to have no friends, to not have a kinship with your family, all of this stuff. And it gave me just such a solid foundation from which to write from. And I am truly blessed to have all that hardship, I guess, because I wouldn't have no point from where to write from without it.
And it does show through, and you are well loved now. So that is a happy ending, Wayne, if not the plumbing.
Unfortunately, there's not that much plumbing in Whitechapel because they're without houses.
Stop. Okay. To end, Allison said that is what hooked me in Whitechapel Road. I was in tears. And yes, the emotions are very believable and very sensitive. Unfortunately, I'm going to be in tears because for now, we spare the trauma and spoil the writer, Brian says. And it's very true. Those things are important.
It is true.
Tamara says our experience makes us better. And it always does. And in your case, definitely a better writer. So thank you for sharing those experiences through your
been my pleasure. Always fun.
Through your work. We are coming to the end. So I will try not to get emotional about that, Wayne. I'll be pounding on your door to sign my books.
Don't forget, we've got the companion book coming up too, right?
Oh, right. Okay. I'm going to take a few minutes because
just quickly because
you get to, the boss. Yes. So, I'm sorry, we got carried away. So you do have a plan for what you're going to write next.
Yeah, I do actually. It's well in the works right now. I'm just finishing up this ridiculousness in my life. But I started writing a companion book to book 3, Unnatural Selection, because there was some stuff that was unfinished, like I call unfinished business. We know what happens to the main guy, but his partner in crime, we don't really know what happens. She's just sort of got a vendetta, but we don't know. Like, does she go off and fulfill this vendetta? Does she forget about it? What happens? So I thought I'm going to create a companion book just to wrap that up. So I'm about 14,000 words, give or take, into that companion book. And so far, I'm pretty happy with the layout. It's going to unfold on the heels of World War II. Back in London, the war is over and everyone's just trying to clean up the aftermath. When I reintroduce this character known as Bethany, and that's going to be the second time you hear about her, but more in It's not about everybody else. It's just about her and what's going on in her world and how she's coping and the unusual set of circumstances that come to light as she discovers the thing that she's actually searching for.
And I, for one, hope she gets that guy.
Not in the way you think, but yeah. He was a bad person.
He was the most horrible of people.
He was. Yeah,
and maybe I've been reading too many of your books, or maybe just the characters I like are reflecting
you're right on. That guy's low. He's really low. So he comes to a fitting end at the end when she kind of finally encounters him quite by happen chance. And,
okay, don't tell us. I
need
to read this one still.
No, okay. I'm not gonna tell anything. Okay. You'll never see, just like everything, you'll never see it coming.
But if the book takes too long, I will be pounding on your door saying, Wayne, tell me now. I can't wait.
Well, I'm supposed to be done this thing in 2 weeks, and then I need like a month to recuperate and just get sort of settled here. And then I plan on sitting down in the evening to actually do some writing. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. And I'm looking forward to getting it done.
Yeah.
Both things.
As am I.
Okay. Well, you'll have to come back when that is done.
Happily.
And we'll talk about it more. I mean, and I'm sorry we got sidetracked on things from that very important question. So That's I will say goodbye for now.
See ya.
Okay.
Have a great day. Thanks again.
We'll talk soon.
You will.
Bye-bye. A great conversation with Wayne. Next week, our guest will be Morgan Daimler. She is an author, witch. Her path inspired by the Irish fairy faith and neo-pagan witchcraft. We'll be discussing her book, 21st Century Fairy, and her soon-to-be independently published fantasy, Into Shadow, which I'm about halfway through and totally impressed with. So I definitely want to discuss that. Thank you, Tamara. And I'll let Wayne know. Until then, may your coffee be hot and your stories sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone. And I will just take a minute here because I'm still thinking about the conversation. Okay. Bye-bye.